Hi, I'm Rory Greener from XR today, bringing you the latest in news and conversation from the extended reality space. And welcome to our latest edition of the Big XR News Show. And to join me to discuss the current trends in XR, specifically enterprise AR, VR, and MR solutions hardware and software, is Cam Stevens, Jennifer Rogers, and Letitia Bashard. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm really looking forward to everyone's insight in the show.
Thanks, Ray. We're happy to be here.
Fantastic. So the biggest piece, obviously, in fact, is the Apple Vision Pro. That's the headline-stealing talking point and has been for the past few months. Recently, at the start of this month, July, the Apple Vision Pro finished its international rollout, ending with the UK. Now the Apple Vision Pro is available in far more regions outside just the US. You're all coming from different backgrounds, different regional areas. It'd be great to get your perspective on just how this new international rollout not only affects that consumer cycle, but then perhaps is bringing more eyes, investment, interest, etc., into the enterprise XR space in your current locations. So, Cam, do you want to kick us off with that? It'd be great to hear your perspective, and welcome to the show this year.
Yeah, thanks, mate. Yeah, obviously the Vision Pro launched in Australia on the Friday just before we've been recording this session, so that was last week, Friday the 12th of July, and there was a bit of buzz going on. Certainly, the real enthusiasts got their hands on AVP well before it landed here in Australia. So those people have had headsets, and those of us that have wanted to see it have definitely gone and sought out ways to find it. But certainly I was out the front of the store in my hometown in Perth, which is not exactly the biggest city in the world. And there was lines around the corner of people wanting to check it out. Really interesting the way that Apple goes, the way that they do the experience. I don't know whether this is the same in other areas of the world, but it's a very hands-on approach. So you book an appointment, you get given an opportunity to really learn from us. You get fitted with the correct face mask, light mask. There's 28 different options. You're given that option when you're in the store, using an iPhone to map your face. So that whole experience is really quite cool, I think. Even though it feels though it's far more consumer driven, even though there's the Apple Enterprise solution team that really sits behind that. So I'm aware that in the background there's been early briefings and those kind of things with key enterprise accounts and stuff like that. As you'd imagine with any type of major technology rollout, these things are going to happen. But because it's so new, we haven't really seen. I haven't seen personally any enterprise discussions about people utilizing the technology in enterprise yet, but we are in it literally less than a week in. So certainly interested to see how that plays out.
Fantastic. And Letitia, from your perspective as well, before we move on to the US, because I think there's a slightly different question there, but in Europe, same question has affected not just consumer interest, but perhaps then some roll on into enterprise too.
It's not been picking up as strongly as in the rest of the world, as I must say. And I had said the same thing last month, but unfortunately, it's still true. I think it's also because of the perhaps sales force and salespeople in Europe are less aggressive, and it's very fragmented. So it's per market, and it's not being tackled as a whole market, but as regional parts, UK, Germany, and these are the best case scenarios. The rest is really still in the toe. And I would say Meta is still very strong in Europe. So we're expecting ROIs a bit more than perhaps other markets, and this is why it's a slow adoption process here, it feels.
Fantastic. And Jennifer, to you as well. Obviously, it's been available in the US for a while now. Has that same level of interest and investment that we saw during its debut initially? Is that optimism and interest still there? The investment, is that still helping enterprise? And perhaps just on a little bit from your perspective as well. They also improved some of the enterprise APIs and developing for the system. Do you have any thoughts on that equally?
Yeah, I think, Roy, that last part of your question combined with a more global rollout really positions things significantly differently for enterprise. We talked a little bit around the pickup here in the States with regards to AVP. That said, because of the limitations with regards to global expansion and scalability, as well as the ways in which enterprise procurement departments and even IT departments, have been thinking about the ways in which they could scale this more broadly. There's certainly been a lot of limitations. I think now that we're starting to see a more global rollout as well as that enterprise capability, now we're in a situation in which enterprise is starting to understand a little bit more about the possibilities associated with actually taking this product and putting it in a global scale. Certainly, some of the concerns that I've heard, prior to this point in time, are a lot around that, right? We could bring things in from a pilot perspective here in the States, but that doesn't necessarily help us to accomplish business goals or KPIs if we can't scale more globally and we don't have the right tools to support it from an enterprise application perspective. So really encouraged by everything that we're seeing. And people are certainly starting to talk about, is now the time to start to explore this beyond kind of just in a design lab or in an innovation lab or hub, and more so what this would look like in terms of application in the wild, so to speak, in enterprise.
Fantastic. Thank you for that. I appreciate you still have the best insight, even though the light switches off halfway through, you still continue to give us expert insight. So thank you so much for that. But from one big vendor to another, I don't know if there's maybe a piece here that could be discussed about the influence of Apple Vision Pro then bringing other major hardware providers into the market. We've got Samsung also playing a role in XR, or soon to be playing a role in XR. Recently at one of their Galaxy events, they unveiled not so much details, but perhaps they have hinted yet again at an XR headset. The details are very slim, but they're aiming for an end of the year, start of next year release window. That isn't set in stone yet. However, the rumors are kind of speculating around that sort of time. The question to take away from this, and perhaps Cam, you could start us up again, would be, what is the influence of these big vendors entering the XR market? And will this see an influx of interest into MR devices, XR devices, or do you perhaps some of these companies diving in, maybe prone to fail even? What's your thoughts on some of these big players, namely Samsung, entering the XR marketplace?
I think to me, it's an ecosystem play. I mean, what makes Apple Vision Pro so special is the fact that you can create content with the LiDAR capability and the stereoscopic video and photo capability of the iPhone, which immediately enables you to then create content which can then be paired. The accessibility that you have, the accessibility options, and the scaffolding about how you interface with an Apple product is seen throughout the entire suite of Apple solutions. So the crown that you use on the side of the side of an Apple Watch is the same as what you do on the side on the Apple Vision Pro. How you interface with glass is how you interface with pinching and pulling around the Apple Vision Pro interface. So the scaffolding that you get, it's an enterprise scaffolding and user interface that is being leveraged here. What I think is really interesting is that the Galaxy Ring was was launched at this same event, and being able to leverage the Galaxy Ring to be able to interface with the device, to be able to use other ways rather than two controllers where both your hands have to do silly things like that. I think having the ecosystem play, leveraging Samsung's and Sony's optical capabilities with what's going on with their high resolution photography on phones. I think the fact that there's an ecosystem at play and people that love Samsung will be wanting to extend that computing spatially. It's just that suite of portfolio. If you go back to Apple, they're not telling you that you should be doing everything on your laptop, on your smartphone. They're not telling you that you should be doing everything on your smartphone or your laptop in your headset. They're saying that each part has a puzzle, is part of the puzzle, and each part has a use case to play, and to extend to spatial from those traditional interfaces or more recent interfaces is really where it's at. So for me, I think all of the major players that are looking to that have computing in their portfolio, be it a smartphone in your hand, computer, or a tablet, or like a Galaxy Tab, ultimately to extend to spatial, it makes sense. And I think they'll be working as a companion. They'll be using the Galaxy Watch. They'll be using the Galaxy Ring. They'll be using the phones as well as the device. So to me, it's just an extension to get spatial, and who knows what will happen next. And I think that's what we'll talk about as we close off the session today.
Android is still the number one in the market, at least in Europe, not in Switzerland per se, because it's Apple, but Android is so huge. And I think South Korea being such a strong market for novelty and enterprise robotics, it might be something that could really trigger some interest at a very concurrential price, actually very competitive price. And since people already have onboarded Android in their systems in enterprise more than Apple, this is also why it's easier to broaden extensively the use of Samsung, I would say. I'm sure it's going to be a hit. I've just heard today that actually Magic Leap was bundling up with, was partnering somehow, we don't know yet how, but with Google. So I see here more of a Magic Leap, Google, HoloLens, Microsoft, NVIDIA, all this, and the Samsung Android being at the same level, or perhaps even Meta and Microsoft. I don't know, but perhaps they will go into the space of Magic Leap more than the space of Quest and Apple Vision Pro. I'm not sure, but they are so enterprise focused, and they have already, yes, such innovative workspaces using different types of tools, device, and robots. I would certainly think that it's going to be major and well crafted.
Yeah, just kind of jumping off on what everyone else has shared. I think Cam and Letitia hit it on the head when we talked about the ecosystem and the ways in which this advances the ecosystem substantially, not only from a user experience perspective in terms of some of the aspects that Cam mentioned, whereby there is a spatial option and we can use every other device that are part of our daily lives in the right ways to do the tasks that we need to do. But also, as always, I can't help but mention my excitement around this from an ecosystem perspective due to the nature of the players and the traditional viewpoints around open infrastructure and the ways in which we utilize open standards as part of the ecosystem. So I'm very encouraged by this development. I think that it is a great step forward. And honestly, it's a great step forward for enterprise and consumers in the sense that it brings some players to the space who know how to do open ecosystems, who do them well, and just bringing another tool into the toolbox to potentially ensure that the experiences that people have are transferable across different devices, different environments, and once again, even that the data that may be advantageous to them as part of that experience, hopefully is managed in a very ethical and safe way, and very open, whereby we've got a lot of user controls around that experience. So I'm very encouraged. I can't wait to see what this what this element brings to the table. And just hearing great things around the thoughts that people are having around the open ecosystem and the ways in which they might be able to play in this space. And I think that is a little bit different than what we've seen with a lot of the other developments, whereby it may be a more closed ecosystem that's more difficult for others to kind of join in and become a part of. So really encouraged about this development and what it means for the space.
And just
Actually,
another,
I hope only that it won't be about entertainment only, because Korea has a very strong gaming or entertainment metaverse field industry, and there are lots of developments linked to this K entertainment field. And I just wonder if that might be part of the product that they're developing as well. But that would be a different race, I guess. It would be a totally different experience.
I think that's fair, right? But I mean, in my mind, sorry, Cam, in my mind, when we can pull together the best parts of that very immersive experience with things that are very real and practical, for people that help them to gain access to opportunity, to do their jobs better, all of those kinds of things, that's very interesting. So I think it'll be interesting to see how all of that evolves. Cam, I'm going to pass it to you. I think you're going to say something.
I was just going to say it'll be interesting to see how they choose to go to market within the broader Samsung electronics brand. I'm not 100% sure how Samsung's set up as a company, but there's like Samsung Heavy Industries, for example, who make oil and gas facilities and those kind of things. So how heavily linked that is with enterprise at the high level Samsung group, I don't know. Speaking from experience and without oversharing, like I was on the Lenovo enterprise team, and it's an ecosystem there where you've got laptops and other things, and a heavy link with Motorola mobile phones, smartphones, and the choices that a company makes around how they choose to, is it an XR team in the business, or is it a seamless extension into spatial that's not considered different? It's just part of the ecosystem. I think will be quite and having had some quite close conversations with the team at Apple to know what their thinking was around that, you can see it's very seamless. So I think it's quite a different go-to-market strategy. Apple's obviously far more consumer focused in terms of just all Apple products are designed to be just to improve the human experience, regardless whether you're at work or not. But it'll be really interesting to see. And I know that Samsung do a lot of work in the mobility space around data privacy and protection with Shield as it relates to cybersecurity and on-device security. How they have their own like health system with all of the stuff with Samsung Health on the Galaxy watches, and there's lots of opportunity. It'll be really interesting to see how they choose to go to market with it. If it's seen as like this separate thing, personally, I think it'll just become a gimmick. It's still only an MR. It's the same Snapdragon processor that the Lenovo ThinkReality VRX has, that the Meta Quest 3 has. It ain't any different when it comes to a headset. So it has to be leveraging the ecosystem. Otherwise, I think it doesn't have any real kind of exciting benefits over anything else.
And just to follow
the
on,
well-being aspects you're underlying, right? The well-being and well-being performance, analytics, and all this is a key component. That's what you mean, right, Cam?
Well, part of I think what makes a lot of the wearable devices sticky, using watches, using the rings, those kind of things, what makes them sticky, what makes people want to wear them and use them every day is the data that comes out of them. I think some way to leverage that existing affinity with those technologies and extend whatever that affinity is to a spatial context, I think is what's going to make the ecosystem headsets like the Apple Vision Pro and devices like a Samsung headset, the ecosystem element, albeit, yes, there are some significant benefits to open ecosystem with who's going to be able to develop solutions and for an Android open source headset versus an Apple ecosystem headset. But ultimately, yeah, not specifically wellness, Letitia, but leveraging things that we're using every day, because we don't use VR headsets every day.
Yeah, and you mentioned the data aspect again, Cam, which I think particularly from an enterprise perspective, but even also, as we've talked about before on this show, the advantages that can bring about from even an individual perspective around connecting people around their skill sets and giving them opportunity in different types of jobs and careers and things like that are all really relevant. I would agree with you. And honestly, when you think about some of these complex industries that have a heavy spatial component and or intend to have a heavy spatial component, the data sources that would need to come in and out of this type of setup are from different or in different places, in different sources and things like that. And so that's where when we get into a situation where we are dealing with a closed ecosystem, it's fine in and of itself if that ecosystem doesn't need to communicate with other data sources. But to Cam's point, and particularly from an enterprise perspective, when we're in an environment whereby we might want to be moving data into that experience, moving data out from that experience into other business applications and visualizations and things like that, it becomes very difficult if it is a closed ecosystem. And so that's why, as I said before, I'm encouraged around this. I'm also encouraged around what this opens up for us, not just from a consumer perspective, but from an enterprise perspective in terms of solving real business challenges with an ecosystem that allows for that kind of flexibility and experience.
And just to follow on from the ecosystem point here, just a side question. This is open to everyone. Obviously, we're talking about Samsung and Apple having these strong ecosystems that can push them forward in enterprise XR. Meta are trying to get into the door of enterprise XR through various different ways. Is it fair to say that they don't have that hardware ecosystem to perhaps prop them up above the others? Is that a fair point? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, Meta doesn't have a hardware ecosystem, number one, but they've got a reputation. Unfortunately, in enterprise, they have a reputation. And whether you like it or not, having said that, maybe what breaks down that reputation might be things like the Llama LLM that's performing quite nicely, where people are going, actually, we like using Llama over Gemini or over Copilot, OpenAI, large language models, and maybe Llama is what will break through as being that enterprise play that connects people. But unfortunately, at least in my understanding of the conversations I've had with hundreds of enterprises around Meta and using Meta Quest Pro, it's like, use it, but just don't let IT know that you use it.
Right.
Just because the second they know, it's all over. Now, they've done a lot of work, but at least in Australia, a lot of people move to HTC and Pico, and that was because Meta was just not able to have the same reputation. Not to say that the headsets and everything that they were delivering were really everyone was using them, but they just were using them covertly. So it's purely on an enterprise perspective. I think Meta has work to do, and my prediction will be it will be through Zuck's magic that he brings to things around stuff like the Llama large language model that I think will be the one that will potentially be the breakthrough into enterprise. But I don't know. My crystal ball could quite easily smash.
Yeah, I don't fully agree here with the enterprise welcome of Meta, because here Pico is quite a sensitive topic. There is one party. The Chinese Communist Party has a seat on the board of Pico, and this is always disturbing to any European enterprise. They say, oh, well, but there is a link to Chinese governments, and we don't know, it makes them uneasy about data mining, data management, and the entire ethical framework. But on the other hand, I know exactly that Pico is a very good device, and that it's more friendly, user friendly sometimes than the Meta. So for developers, it's easier to be on Pico, for instance, with the updates and such. So it's weird here, because it's the contrary of what you're saying. Enterprises, even the World Economic Forum is running their global village on Meta, and that was kind of a surprise for me. But it's because it's also Microsoft, So
no, I think that'll be price. It's just price. They'd be doing it on price, accessibility, right? The lowest. It wouldn't matter. Whoever has the lowest price headset would be the one the WF would go for, because it means the largest reach, the largest scale.
No, because they have the Pro. They don't have it's not only the price. There is something like that here. People have a bias toward Pico because of the Chinese link.
Yeah.
Definitely.
I guess the same with the DJI drones as well. Like, that's been certainly in the US. There's a lot of scrutiny around China in particular, drone manufacturers. So it's definitely like a sensitive political topic, and does influence consumer behavior and political, like the behavior of the country, and of regulation, and of the rules and requirements. And obviously with GDPR being so strong in Europe, and with, I think once we start seeing new AI acts and those come into force, then the data sovereignty and the data discussion, particularly because we're going to be using far more AI plus XR together, that the hardware will become even less of a story than the data and the artificial intelligence, machine learning technologies that are going to go with that.
And this
particularly
is why
as we start leveraging the sensors with facial recognition and eye tracking. To control an Apple headset, you use your eyes as one of the most. It maps your eye. It's probably one of the most sophisticated parts of your body to get so much data from. It's a really interesting. I guess none of us know the answers, but it's a really interesting discussion.
And if you think ahead and you think of the way some governments or some hardware firms, because there is the software part in those hardware, so they could already have compiled billions of data to make the future AI be even more, be even more to the point and efficient. That's scary. So this is I guess that's how they think as well, and this is why they go for the safer choice. But do we actually know it's safer?
Yeah, I mean, just to kind of jump in here and pull the threads through on some of the things that you two have already shared. I think Roy originally asked the question around hardware. I think Cam hit it right on the head when we talk about the idea around accessibility of hardware in the space because of price points. Now, I think we've all talked about this before with regards to we expect those price points to continue to come down to a point whereby maybe this is not so much of a challenge. But as we see it today, one of the strengths of Meta's offering is the low price point on the devices. That said, I would argue, much as I think a lot of others have, that I'm not sure this is about the hardware so much as trusted ecosystems and the concept around that, both from the perspective of the reputation that Meta's had in the past, particularly enterprise, with regards to it being very difficult to deploy and scale in a safe way devices across a large global ecosystem or global enterprise even. Those tools have not been robust enough with regards to what enterprise architecture would expect to see. And so that has eroded some of that trust. I think also there is the entire conversation about data privacy that you all have already brought up, and the reputation around, is Meta going to be a good steward around data? Is Meta going to be able to, to put users and enterprise in a situation in which they trust that data sitting there? I would say right now that trust is not there. I would agree with Cam. When you talk to your average enterprise, there's a lot of hesitancy about that, right? What data is being captured? We don't know. We can't see it. We can't access it. We just don't have a lot of trust in that. And so I think in this case, yes, the hardware is more accessible. There are many other challenges around trust, around being able to deploy and scale safely, as well as data privacy and stewardship. And so until we can get past that, I think from an enterprise perspective, still a lot of skepticism around Meta. Certainly, I think Cam made this point as well. That doesn't mean that we can't get to a point in which there's a relationship that's been established in such a way in which there's trust. But at the moment, I don't think that's the case. I also am interested to just see, as the price points continue to fall with other players, and we do get to an accessibility point around the hardware itself, how does that change the game, particularly with some of the players we've talked about earlier this call who do have trusted relationships in enterprise and have been very much considered to be a good steward of those ecosystems and also just putting the right tools in place to help enterprise to do that safely.
Fantastic. That's brilliant insight over all of that, especially the ecosystem side too. That could be something that could be easily overlooked sometimes in terms of, the factors that play in enterprise adoption. But let's move over to our final discussion point for today. And that is the idea, or perhaps some of the forecasts of VR headset interest and shipments declining year on year over the past 2 quarters. The shipments have dropped by, I believe, about 69 or 67% year on year, with interest assumably going or forecasted to go towards AR headsets and MR headsets, or AR smart glasses, excuse me, and MR headsets. This is probably due to a volley of reasons, but I'm interested to hear your perspective on what do you think the future of VR headsets is. There's a lot of use cases out there. I think the big one being immersive training really for VR headsets, but there's an increasing amount of use cases for MR headsets, AR headsets too. I wanted to open this one up to the floor and see who'd be interested in chatting about VR headsets. Are they fading? What are your thoughts?
I think this is a really compelling question, and I think we've been asking ourselves this in the space for a very long time, particularly on the enterprise side, but probably more broadly. I think sometimes, and we've talked about this before, we get really focused on the hardware and the form factor and everything else, whereby I think everything around, what the metaverse is, depending on who's defining it and all of that is very much not about the hardware, but is about, connecting with people and processes and equipment from an enterprise perspective in a spatial way. The hardware kind of fades a little bit when we start to talk about what it is we're trying to solve for. And I think, VR headsets are the form factor that we've had to kind of bring some of this to light. That said, when we talk even about, you mentioned immersive training. I mean, we are moving to a place in which we're trying to reach people where they are and try to enable their skill development in real time. It's interesting because even in the education or learning space, in the past, the technology hasn't been necessarily positioned to allow us to do that. It's been more like, we're going to take you out of work. We're going to put you in a training or a learning environment, and you're gonna do some things, and then we're gonna put you back in work, in the flow of work, on the work site, whatever that looks like for you. I think VR is very much positioned around that kind of mindset, right? Just inherently around the form factor. We're taking you out of the world. We're putting you in an environment that is the antithesis of the world in which you're interacting with on a day-to-day basis for the purposes of you practicing a certain skill or being in an environment that you can't be in the real world. And I think all of that is still valid. In fact, I think it's important because it gives us the opportunity for colleagues to practice things not in an environment where the actions that they take could potentially have damaging impact, or even put them in an environment that they're not in their physical space, to learn new skills that they don't have access to learn where they are. All of that is valid from a VR perspective, and I think all of that will continue to move forward. That said, some of the aspects that are not related to that around enabling people, enabling tasks, and enabling processes in the actual physical environment are not very conducive to VR. We're inherently taking people out of the world, taking them out of their human ability to see and sense the actual physical environment. And in some cases, that's not even safe, right? And so I think we are continuing to see AR make more and more traction. I think that we absolutely will continue to see that, particularly in the aspects in which, once again, from an enterprise perspective, we're connecting people, processes, equipment in real time, and giving insights around the ways in which we can make all of those pieces work better together. That makes no sense if I'm trapping you in a headset where you can't actually see the things around you in the real world. And so I think it's logical and natural for us to see a little bit of shift or modulation in this space as people are starting to figure out what VR is really good for and what AR is really good for. And I think from my perspective, they both have a valid place in the scenario and in the ecosystem. I think the market is maybe starting to understand the delineation between those things a little bit better, and particularly on the enterprise side, starting to say, okay, from a connected worker perspective, where we want people in their actual work environments connecting with others, that we don't want them in a VR headset. We want them in an AR device where they can actually see and sense their environment, but then also access additional information that layers on top of that environment to help them make better decisions. So I'm not surprised to see it. I'm actually encouraged to see it because I think, to me, it's a sign that the market's starting to figure out where these different form factors today potentially fit and align to business solutions, which I don't think we maybe necessarily saw in some of the younger years of this, where we didn't have the maturity where people were able to kind of understand, A, that there are different form factors, then B, start to match those form factors better to their business environments and applications and really the problems that they're trying to solve.
I totally agree. I think this is very much a case of different devices and form factors will be needed for different use cases, and the more sophisticated our more people get, particularly in an enterprise, around knowing and even understanding like what type of form factor would be appropriate to be used in the flow of work, which type of form factor would be used for knowledge transfer, for collaboration, for doing certain activities. Some might be to de-stress or desensitize. I'm working on a project at the moment in control rooms where people are totally overstimulated, and we actually want to bring them into a VR environment to de-simulate them, to give them peace and change the way that they're getting so much cognitive overload. So there's different form factors for different reasons. It's just the same as when we went from a laptop to a tablet or to a phone. We weren't saying you should be doing heavy word processing on a phone. Like, it's technically possible, but it's not the right form factor for that. Now, it's not like all of a sudden and then when the smart watch came and we could do email on there, well, yeah, you could, but you're not really going to be spending a lot of time clearing out your inbox on a watch. So the watch has its place, the smartphone has its place, the tablet has its place, the laptop has its place. We're not going to get rid of any of those. The only kind of like counter to that was the mini disc. Like, the mini disc just didn't have a place. The mini disc had to go. Like, it didn't fit anywhere well. So the mini disc went, but all of these other things I think will go, will naturally play. I think what we'll see though, in terms of how the form factor will change, is we are in this transformational shift of where we're starting to talk to our devices more in the enterprise. And I think talking to a VR headset with the form factor isn't as relevant or natural as talking in MR or talking in with smart glasses. We'll talk and we'll leverage machine learning and large language models to interface in fast, real-time interactions. And when we can start speech to texting speech to image generation, and we can start inquiring over computer vision, then we will need some form of way to visualize that. It probably won't necessarily need to be immersive, but it will need to be wearable. So I'm forecasting that the traditional like large format tissue box that you put on your face, like the cardboard box that goes, like that needs to go. Like, everyone wants that to go. But we just don't have sophisticated technology stack to enable us to do that yet. But at some point we'd like to get rid of that naturally. But I think the point is, and if you look at what's happening with the Vision Pro, there's no joysticks. It's just moving your hands, and it's very subtle movements in space. We'll soon be able to do that with just very simple gestures and movements, and possibly even thinking or eye tracking and talking. We're going to be having a far more natural interaction with our devices, whatever form they take. So will virtual reality headsets decline? I think generally speaking, based on that narrative, they probably will, but they're not going to, they will still have a place for particular uses that they're supposed to be designed for, which I think for the foreseeable future, there will be use cases that we would want to use those types of headsets for.
Yeah, just to play off of that really quickly, I think, and then sorry, Letitia, I think in addition to that, what we have to acknowledge, and we've talked about this before on the show, is that means that the same person is moving in and out of those different devices over time for different purposes. And so it just gets back to the ecosystem play again with regards to how well these devices talk to each other, play with each other, how they recognize the user and put the user in the right place that they need to be for that experience and that form factor at that point in time. And so more and more, it just emphasizes the idea that, you know, these closed ecosystems are going to be honestly pretty problematic if we are expecting a world in which people are going in and out of VR, AR, other form factors in the course of their day-to-day. Go ahead, Letitia.
Thank you. No, I wanted to speak about the field of view because obviously this is also triggering the use cases. And here what I've been witnessing is really depending on trade and industries like architecture, engineering, construction has already been very very keen on the HoloLens, but the field of view is so small that perhaps MR might be, bringing something new to them. I know they've used it for tunnel digging, for train incidents. How do we say? When there is something happening and they need to be quick, so remote assistance. That's what I wanted to say. And also in the medical field, I guess those are two very different use cases, as you were suggesting. In the medtech field, there is a use case for the educational and training part in VR, and then there is also some applications for MR where you see what you're doing on the real body or body parts. But it's a different type of experience. And then I look at entertainment, when you want to be collaborative in a very different space, then you stick to VR, because this is where you can create wonderful full-fledged CGI experiences. And for me, LBVR will still embrace the VR aspect. Although MR, it might take a while also, simply because of the specs. It's not going to be easy to have collaborative talks like you do on Horizon or in other spaces and platforms in MR. It's not going to be, it's going to come, but in a few years. And that's what I'm excited about. That's the collaborative aspect that might come to MR. Because when we get there, that might be really a huge adoption criteria, because you're in your real life. Whereas, as you were saying, Jennifer, right now we're absorbed by our screens, and on the workplace, they don't want more screen absorption. They want out in nature or doing sports rather than more screen time. And so this is also a health and wellness issue, as we were talking about before. So for me, really, there have been two very distinct streams of adoption. And this is a very good question, because VR has its own entertainment and education / training, bubble, which might be also enclosed. It has to do with enclosed environments. And then you have the AR / MR, but MR is still developing. And this is what makes me really, really thrilled about these technologies, the spatial.
Yeah, and Letitia, you bring up a great point there too, not even just about the spatial aspect, but also around the form factor itself and the restrictions. I know, I did quite a bit of work for some time in mining, outdoor environments, lots of light, lots of dust. We also have explosives in that environment. So, that is definitely not, I need a ruggedized type of equipment. I need something that, is zone rated to be near explosives. All of those pieces, we definitely don't see as much of that in the VR space. We do have some strong players in the AR space, like RealWear and some of the others that we've talked about on this call already. I think, those are the trusted partners in those types of environments, right? Whereby it is literally not sustainable nor safe necessarily to bring enclosed headsets and things that are not ruggedized into that environment, because we have to be very aware of our physical space and what's happening there. So I think that was a great point, Letitia, and very well taken. It just adds to, not only is there a use case around these things, the physical environment itself is such that different types of form factors might be more appropriate for different types of enterprises or even consumers. I think one of the things that we've seen in the enterprise space, particularly in construction, heavy industrial, that's not manufacturing, but actually outside, in an outside environment, is that challenge. And once again, the accessibility issue associated with that hardware, because while it is ruggedized and zone rated and all of those things, it's also a lot more expensive, right? And unfortunately, a lot of our colleagues that are working in those types of environments don't necessarily have the funds to be able to make for those devices to be accessible. So once again, it's that push and pull that we've been in this space with regards to hardware and the accessibility aspects that we talked about before. As those start to kind of erode and go away, it'll be interesting to see, are we able to get more people access to some of these things that can really make a significant difference, not only in their safety as they do their work, but also in their ability to build future skills to continue to grow and have additional opportunity as a result.
Yes, and you mentioned a bit the ergonomic part, because on construction sites and in these AEC trades, you need a helmet, so you can't wear both at the same time. And that this is really a silly answer, but this is a real answer, a field answer. And when you were speaking of the Kleenex box and the bulkiness, well, look, AVP is no better. And this is why we're still expecting the next iteration of AR smart glasses. And I hope Samsung will go in that space, because that's where real enterprise adoption could lay, in my opinion, at least.
Fantastic. That's some brilliant insight on all of those questions, especially that one at the end. I think, at the end of this year, the market for enterprise XR devices, etc., is going to look very, very, very different. But we'll hold that thought for perhaps a future episode, because I think it's time we wrap up. I appreciate all your time. I know you're all very busy in the industry. Cam, Jennifer, Letitia, thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks, Roy.
Thanks, Rory. Thanks, Jennifer. Thanks, Letitia. Thanks, everyone.
Great. Cheers, guys.
Thank you.
I've been Rory Green today. You get more XR news,
yes.
Follow the XR Today news channel. Thank you very much for watching.